Hey everybody, welcome to Recipe for Reality Small Bites, Episode 2. This is my new companion piece series in companion with the Recipe for Reality main show where we cover the Survivor season at hand. This is my own little spin-off series where I will be taking a relevant Survivor topic to the episode we just watched and breaking down a top 10 list or any sort of list that pertains to that topic. And this topic is inspired by the quite disastrous Yanu tribe, and that is the top 10 cursed tribes in Survivor history. Now, this is my own spin-off show, like I said, so please make sure to like and subscribe to this channel to hear more of these spin-off episodes if you like these episodes, and please leave your constructive criticisms in the comments below if you want to see this channel and this show in particular grow, because I know it is still new. It's really hard to compile a top 10 list of the most cursed tribes, because I call it cursed tribes because I think calling a tribe the worst tribe on paper is tough, because every tribe has at least a few good players that, due to circumstance, are put in a pretty sticky situation sometimes, to where I don't necessarily think I'm going to be ranking these 10 tribes on how bad I think the overall caliber of player is, because we've seen some of these players from these tribes go on to either play in other seasons and do well, or play on other tribes and do well after swaps. So it's more so the spirit of the tribe. What is the camp atmosphere like? How do they get along? How successful are they? How unlucky are they? And how far do they get whittled down? Because that's a big part of it too, especially with compiling a top 10. Because there's been a lot of disastrous Survivor tribes, and we're watching one unfold before our eyes with that purple tribe Yanu on Survivor 46. So I thought it would be an appropriate time to talk about the 10, at least in my opinion, most disastrous, most cursed tribes in Survivor history. And it was a hard list to compile because, like I said, there's so many factors to take in. I did put some on the list because I thought their camp life was just toxic or not very healthy. Some I put on the list strictly because their strategy was all over the place, and some just due to unfortunate circumstance. And I also took into account how the tribes played out in the season, because some tribes really struggle early on, but then will go on to produce a winner. And I think 3 of the tribes we're about to talk about today ended up producing the winner of the season, despite being a train wreck of a tribe. So it's going to be really interesting to take a look at them. But I did have some honorable mentions, starting with the very first season, of course, with Survivor Borneo with the Pagong tribe. This is an example of a tribe that did well in the pre-merge, did totally fine, but then once they got to the pre-merge, kind of got decimated by the Tagis. But again, you can't really give them much fault because they didn't really know necessarily how the mechanics of the game worked back then, so you can't really fault them on being cursed. But we do call it pagonging when a tribe gets picked off because of what happened to the Pagong tribe on Borneo. And in a similar boat, I also have the Heroes tribe on Heroes vs. Villains. I don't think they're a cursed tribe because they ultimately went into the merge with a 5-5 split, and had JT's idol play actually worked and they were able to pull over Russell, or if he hadn't given the idol up in the first place and they went to Rocks and one of the villains went home, the Heroes win the season. So I don't think they're a cursed tribe, but I do think they were very unlucky, and they were in a similar circumstance to the Pagong tribe in the fact that they got whittled down. Another similar tribe is the Zapatera tribe from Redemption Island, another one that wasn't a disaster pre-merge, but it really wasn't until the merge hit that they were completely decimated by Boston Rob and the rest of the Omatepes. And I do think that is solely due to the eagerness to get Russell out. They kind of threw that challenge to get Russell out, and from then on they just kept losing some numbers to where they went into the merge kind of outnumbered and outclassed and outplayed by Boston Rob. I think if they had just stuck it up and stuck with Russell and maybe gone into the merge with a heavy majority or some more power against Rob, they could have made things happen. So they kind of did that to themselves. But again, I don't think it's a weak tribe on paper. I just think in the circumstances of the season they kind of got decimated. Another one that I struggle to put on the list just because of how successful they were in the end game is the Tika 3, the Tika tribe. The Tika tribe lost a lot on Survivor 44, but the truth of the matter is those 3 players, Jam, Carolyn, and Carson, dominated that season, so it's hard to say, like, they're a train wreck tribe. Also because a lot of the train wreckiness of their tribe came from the tribe swap by bringing Josh in, so I can't really fault them initially. They also had the Bruce medevac, which is just kind of unfortunate. So really, they didn't play terribly. They were just kind of unfortunate in everything that happened to them, which I guess could put reason for them being on a top 10 list of cursed tribes, but I think they had less to do with their failure than the other 10 that I chose for the list. I also considered the Malolo tribe on Ghost Island, another one that just got so so unlucky. Even after a tribe swap, Malolo kept going low, low, low. That was kind of a common theme, but I was just not compelled enough to put them on the list. Also because I think the pre-merge players of Ghost Island who went home are actually pretty good players, so I don't necessarily think they were a doomed tribe. I just think they got unlucky by a set of circumstances. Same with the Ravu tribe on Fiji. They were pretty much a disaster, but again, it was because of an awful twist. The have-nots, how if you kept winning, you kept getting rewards and luxury, and I think Ravu just always had an uphill battle to climb, and was never going to quite climb it. I also considered, really close to making the list, was the Kasaya tribe from Panama. This was the old women's tribe that obviously lost the first immunity, but also once they swapped, this is where Shane and Courtney got put on. This is where Sari was. I do not consider them too much of a train wreck tribe, only because I think they're train wrecks in terms of personalities, but I do think there was a lot of good game strategic stuff going on in Kasaya, especially with Sari. So I'm not going to put a Sari tribe in the most top 10 doomed tribes of all time, because I think Sari navigated it very well. And then lastly, in my honorable mentions, I did consider Totang for Korong. That was a very tough cut. That is the Brawn tribe, and I think it's solely because of the Alicia, Scott, and Jason drama and the Jennifer kind of impromptu kind of tribal council meltdown that led to her going home. It was a very much cursed tribe, and it's definitely number 11 on this list if we were to make a number 11, but it just missed out on the top 10 just because the top 10 I feel a little bit more compelled on to talk about. So here we go. Kicking off the top 10, maybe a tribe that many people don't really think about as an all-time bad tribe in the grand scheme of things, but it's on a season that is a bit of a cursed season just because of some of the bad stuff that happened on that season, and it is a tribe that is almost hilarious to see kind of go up in flames, which is the Saboga tribe from All Stars. Now, this has some pretty heavy hitter names on it. I mean, Ethan, Jerry, Rupert, Jenna Lewis, who gets third place on the season, like the track record on the season and the caliber of players overall, and then Tina, who's a winner, and Rudy, who's a beloved fan favorite. Like, these are likable players, but it is a absolute train wreck from, the immediate winner, anti-winner mentality from Jenna kind of causing this toxicity with Ethan, and with Tina being immediate targets, even though Ethan's one of their stronger players. And then, of course, Rudy getting hurt, but then still surviving the first vote because they wanted to get out a winner with Tina, and then Rudy kind of dragging the team down in strength. But then you also have Rupert and his shelter, which is an absolute top 10 terrible shelter, if not the worst shelter ever built in the history of Survivor, leading to their quite literal collapse. The thing with Saboga is that they are very short-lived. They get split up pretty early on once Tina and Rudy are gone and once a few rounds have played out. But I just think it's a cursed tribe. If you look at it, only Jenna, Lewis, and Rupert succeed in this tribe, and then they just become kind of pawns for Rob and Amber's game. But it really is one of those really catastrophic pre-merge tribes where every time they cut back to the Saboga camp, something chaotic or disastrous is going on. And I think, just in order of who they just in terms of who they booted, in what order, and just the overall shelter debacle, and just the overall camaraderie not really being there for Saboga, I did put them at number 10. Number 9 is another tribe that I think is pretty fine on paper. They kind of got dominated in a way that Pagang got dominated in Borneo, where they got picked off once they hit the merge. But there's one big sole reason why I put them in the most cursed tribes, and that is Manono from One World. And this is a tribe that I think is just cursed simply because of Colton and all the drama that Colton had with all his other castmates, to where Colton wanted to work with the girls, he didn't want to work with the guys, so much so that there was so much beef that they went to tribal. After they had won immunity, they gave up a tribal council immunity idol to go and vote out one of their own, and that's ultimately when Bill went home. I just think this tribe is filled with a lot of toxicity in terms of attitudes. I think there's a lot of fighting, a lot of animosity in this tribe. This tribe just never really got along. And like I said, once they hit the merge, they kind of got dominated by the women. But they could have easily prevented that. I think Jonas is a capable social player. I think Leaf is a fine ally to take along. I think Troyzan is a competent enough strategist. The problem is they just didn't gel with one another to where they couldn't make anything happen, to where people like Jay and people like Michael really didn't have any way to get any grounding. Colton was really the kind of glue keeping the women aligned with some of the men, and then when Colton went out, it was even more disastrous because Colton was really the main strategist, even though Colton was also the source of the drama. So I think Colton added a lot to the cursed nature of this tribe, also because Colton got medevaced and then came back and quit, and essentially revealed that he quit the first time. He didn't actually get medevaced. So I think just the overall aura of Colton and just the way One World played out, I think of all the tribes like Pagong and Borneo, or like Zapatera and Redemption Island, the tribes that just kind of got whittled down once they hit the merge, I think Manono is one of the biggest examples of the biggest failures of that type of tribe, solely because they didn't have to get picked off at the merge. They just let themselves get picked off by the women because they were that much of a disaster, and they gave up immunity. Which is even dumber than Eric, because Eric, at least, there was a brilliant 5-person or 4-person alliance of women kind of, manipulating him into doing it. Here, they just did it because they wanted to vote someone off because they didn't like each other, which I think is even worse than what Eric did on Micronesia. So they come in at number 9. At number 8, this was a tough one for me to rank only because they are such a new tribe, a Nuwa tribe, if you know what I mean. It is Ua from 41, and the reason they are on this list is because obviously they get whittled down to 2. Ricard and Shan are the only 2 left standing after this pre-merge phase. The only reason I didn't put them higher, though, is because this is the new era, so I think there was kind of an overall unknown about how Beware advantages played out and stuff like that, to where I do think, Brad taking the risk seated to go home, and then, of course, them getting whittled down and then having to get rid of Genie and JD. I mean, I think it was an unfortunate set of circumstances, which is why they're on this list, but ultimately I still think Ricard and Shan navigated this tribe very well. Like, I didn't look at this tribe and say, wow, this is a disaster of a tribe. I just think they got unlucky in the fact that they booted Brad a little early when he probably could have won challenges for them, and then JD and Genie weren't very much help in challenges as is, and plus Shan and Ricard's very good at challenges. Shan, not necessarily someone who comes to mind as a super big challenge threat, so I really just think it was more of an overall weakness with their tribe, especially going up against other tribes. The plus I'll give them is that, like I said, they do have a bit of unity. Like, I don't think of this tribe as a very divided tribe. The most division comes from Ricard and Shan themselves, but they ultimately are still able to get on the same page with a lot of things and build this onion alliance with Genie and with JD, earlier on, so where they're still secure, and they're never going to have to target each other early on. And then you also have to give them credit for winning that second immunity challenge in the round that Voce went home. So they at least did win stuff. The problem is they just lost a lot of stuff too. But it is the new era, so you didn't really know what to expect. So I do give them a little bit of a free pass on that, because the game itself was a little bit different. But moving on now to number 7, which is a tribe. It's actually 2 tribes, and the reason I put both tribes in the same spot is because essentially after the tribe swap, the same tribe essentially stayed together, and that is the Manu/Lesu tribes from Edge of Extinction. Now this one's tough because ultimately the winner of the season comes from this tribe, which is Chris Underwood. The problem is Chris Underwood gets voted out very early on in the game because this tribe is such a disaster. I mean, you have Reem, you have Keith, you have Wendy, you have Rick Devens, who also gets voted out early in the game and has to win his way back. Chris, who's voted out early on in the game. The real only survivors who make it through deep into the game that don't get voted out are David Wright, Lauren, Kelly Wentworth, and Wardog. And even then, Kelly Wentworth, Wardog, and David go early in the merge because they are ultimately just not in with the numbers, and they're big threats. And I think from the beginning, this tribe just didn't really have the strength when going up against a tribe with Joe Anglam and Eric and Gavin, these stronger competitors on the island. But even though they were not the strongest team, they still get out Chris rather early, and Chris was probably their biggest strength on that tribe. So ultimately from that, they were all a little bit doomed and disaster ridden. And then also Wendy, releasing the chickens and all that mayhem that ensued. And then obviously when Rick comes back into the game and they're the Lesu tribe, going into the merge, they just can never really find their grounding. They are the ultimate underdogs, and ultimately they do pull off a victory, but they never really got their footing, to where the only person who really had any win equity that didn't return to the game, meaning everyone but Rick and Chris, is probably Lauren. But even then, Lauren was, I feel like, following in the footsteps of Kelly Wentworth for most of the season, and it wasn't until Kelly went home that she started to emerge as her own victorious player. But even then, I still think there's a chance Lauren gets cut pretty late in the game, regardless of whether or not Chris comes back, but especially with Chris coming back. Now, I do give them the credit. Yes, Chris won this season, but again, he got voted out 3rd on that tribe because they were such a disaster, and ultimately, because of Wardog's strategy, they ended up booting Chris very early when they probably should have kept him. They probably would have won more challenges. Overall, just a disaster of a tribe that I think, because of the names on the tribe, like David and like Kelly and like Devens and like Chris, people don't really remember how much of a disaster they were, but they were really a disaster. At number 6, a tribe I can't really believe is in number 6, because this was like the ultimate underdog story. But it is the Foa Foa tribe from Samoa, and this obviously results in the Foa Foa 4 being Mick, Jason, Natalie, and Russell, who do make up 4 of the final 5. So I do give them that credit, and that is why they're ultimately not in the top 5, because they do make up 4 of the final 5. But if you look at strictly their pre-merge game, they are an absolute disaster. And the reason why I put them on this list is because of how disastrous that early portion of the game is. From Barassi getting medevaced and Ben just being the absolute worst on the island with no redeemable qualities, but also just Russell, as good as a player he is, he does pick off some strong people solely because he feels threatened by them strategically, and he kind of strings the weaker people along with him. Now, granted, he does keep around Mick and Jason, who are two of the stronger physical presences on the tribe, but even people like Marisa, who is very, very strong, you have someone like Ashley, who's pretty strong. These are competitors that I think would have kind of helped the tribe in the long run, but because they were more threatening strategically to Russell, Russell picked them off. Now, what I do give him credit for is that Russell was knowingly doing this. He knew that he was making the tribe weaker in consistently voting out the wrong people. He was doing it for his own personal gain. So I do give Russell credit where at least he was knowingly making the tribe weaker. So could you call it cursed or could you call it strategy? I don't know. But the fact that you're strategically trying to whittle down your numbers so that you could kind of come back and maneuver your game later, that is a pretty crazy, chaotic tribe. So I had to put Foa Foa on here, even though of all the tribes we've talked about, they have the best run in terms of the actual post-merge portion of the game, so I have to give them that credit. And then at number 5, I do have another similar scenario where, like we talked about Edge of Extinction with Chris and Samoa with Natalie and Russell, this tribe does produce 2 of the endgame players in the game, but ultimately it does whittle down to 2 players, and that is Matt Singh in the Philippines. And this was, up until, recently, probably if you just asked me off the cuff what the worst tribe in Survivor history is, I'd probably say Matt Singh, but the truth of the matter is Denise still goes on to win, and Malcolm and Denise continue to be a really strong duo in the game to where maybe the fact that they got whittled down aided in their success, whereas the top 4 tribes on my list, none of them end up winning the game because they are so divided and so defeated before they even get to the merge. Whereas Philippines, at least it gives Malcolm and Denise a path to the end. And ultimately, I do think the boot order they went with was the right boot order. I think Zayn was obviously going to be first boot just based on how he was acting. I think Roxy wasn't gelling with the tribe, and then Angie was the next weakest. And then when you're down to 3, it just ended up being Loyalty, which sent Russell home. So while they are a disaster, while they keep losing, I think they get the people out in the right order in terms of strength and tribe unity to where the tribe does still feel united. Like, I still feel like Russell, Malcolm, and Denise still worked well together. It's just the fact that they kept losing and then ultimately they had to cut Russell. Even Angie, who kind of rubbed people the wrong way because she was so naive, was still likable, and Malcolm got along with her fine. So I think the camaraderie is actually probably stronger than that of like a Foa Foa or even a Manu Lesu or even like Manono. But the problem is their actual track record. I mean, the fact that they narrowed down to 2 players is a really big knock against them. And so Matt Singh lands here at number 5. And number 4, another tribe that is a disaster but does have some endgame players in the mix, is the Fang tribe from Gabon. It is such a cursed tribe that they don't even know how to pronounce the name. They call it Fang, they call it Fang. Now, obviously, you have to give credit to Maddie, who I think actually played a really good game that season, probably just because he didn't speak at all on the early portion of the game, so as to not make himself a target. I also give credit to Kenny, who drove a lot of the strategy, and Crystal, who was kind of his right-hand man. But Crystal and Randy's drama was not fun on the island, and I do think, Fang is one of those tribes that's cursed from the start strictly because of how it was picked. I mean, Jillian being the oldest person, picking Susie as our first pick for the tribe when Susie is very clearly one of the weaker people on the tribe, strictly because she wants to have another mother-like energy on the tribe. I mean, they were doomed from the very start when that tribe was picked. I mean, you look at the other tribe and they have Marcus, they have Charlie, they have Ace, they have all these really strong people, and then you look at the Fang tribe and it's like Randy and Crystal and all these people that are just not the strongest people in the tribe. Now, granted, Crystal was probably someone that was looked at as a strong competitor early on because she was an Olympic runner, but sooner we found out that she wasn't necessarily a great competitor in the Survivor Challenge aspects. But Fang, I don't even know how to say it anymore. Fang is a really disastrous tribe in the grand scheme of things in the Gabon season, which is already a train wreck of a season. So the fact that you have a train wreck tribe on a train wreck season, all the stuff with GC being the leader, not being the leader, Dan K just kind of being out of the mix. I mean, rest in peace, love Dan K. But, I mean, Gabon is just a cluster F of a season, and I think Fang is a big reason to that cluster F. But it was really kind of one of those just doomed from the start things based on the schoolyard pick'em way of picking the tribes. And I think if Survivor Gabon had started and Probst and the other producers had put the contestants into tribes, maybe we wouldn't have seen a disastrous tribe, which is why the 2 tribes I have above Fang here in number 2 and 3 slot, I give a lot more slack to because they they were put together by production and they failed. This one, at least Fang kind of did it to themselves. So number 3, we do have a very, very cataclysmic tribe from a very popular season, which is Survivor Cagayan. It is the Brains tribe, otherwise known as the Luzon tribe, otherwise known as the Luzon Losers, who are just a disaster. I mean, Jatia pouring out the rice is not even the worst thing that happens on this tribe. I would say all the stuff with Garrett is probably the most, chaotic stuff. The fact that you're getting rid of your strongest guy who has an idol but doesn't play his idol, even though he's a target. But really, they should have gotten out Jatia, but should they have? And then you have Spencer, who, say what you will about Spencer nowadays as a person. But Spencer at the time was this underdog, but he really shouldn't have been, because he was thinking logically and saying, why are we getting out Garrett this early? Which kind of starts the tension between him and Cass, which kind of lasts for the whole season. The only one who feels like completely level-headed on this tribe is Tasha. But even then, Tasha makes decisions sometimes with her heart over her strategy in keeping Jatia over Garrett, which in the grand scheme of things, I'm glad Jatia stayed because it led to some entertaining stuff. But Luzon was just a disaster. And yes, David Sampson, he's a fine first boot. He doesn't play the game particularly well, but he's not necessarily a big train wreck either. But I think just this tribe from the start, just the way the captains were divvied out and the way the idols came about, I mean, everything was just so messy. And I think it's because all these players were trying to play almost too hard, to where they all just started butting heads with one another, and the trust was just kind of lost across the board. So I do give them credit in the fact that Spencer does make it to 4th place, Cass makes it to 3rd place, Tasha makes it to 6th place, but the other 3 players don't make it past the first 4 episodes. So how much credit can you really give Luzon here? I mean, Luzon, you just watch those first few episodes of Cagayan. It is one of the most disastrous tribes ever, so they come in here at number 3. At number 2, a very recent tribe that also sounds like Luzon. It is Lulu from Survivor 45, and this one, I think of all the tribes so far, not only got whittled down to 2 players, being Emily and Caleb, but of those 2 players, they don't make it further than 7th place. I mean, the whole top 6 of that season is made up of 2 other tribes, the Bellows and the Rebas. So Lulu not only has a terrible pre-merge, but they don't have a very successful post-merge either. Caleb is immediately targeted and has to use a shot in the dark and only gets by because of a shot in the dark. And then Emily, while she does have good grounding for a little while, she becomes an easy target at 7 due to the Rebas being so strong and the Bellows just having less win equity than Emily. So I really don't think Lulu played it well in the pre-merge and also didn't really set themselves up well for the post-merge either, where at least if you look at Luzon, at least Spencer, Tasha, and Cass made it far in that season. At least the Philippines, Denise and Malcolm made it far. Samoa, the Foa Foa made it far. Edge of Extinction, Chris wins. Here, Lulu doesn't go far in the game at all. But I don't want to talk about Caleb and Emily, because I think Caleb and Emily are the least amount of problems on this tribe. Obviously, you have 2 quitters on this tribe, which is already pretty bad. You have Sean, who kind of pseudo-quit the game, even though he technically got voted out, and then Hannah, who quits on the first episode, which I think a lot of people have been kinder to her as the time has gone on, because she ultimately did kind of save Emily's life in the game because she quit. But then you have Brandon, who is just one of the worst challenge performers of all time. Say what you will about him as a person. He's a great person. But he's just a terrible game player. I respect the guy. I'm glad he got to do it, but he just kind of makes all the wrong moves in this season. He can't complete that puzzle, and then I think he lose his vote, I think. And then he also just can't really compete in the challenges well. I think Brandon would be really great on Big Brother, honestly, because his social game is the strongest aspect of his game, and I think he does show potential there. But as Survivor goes, he's just not really well equipped for that. And then you have Saboga, who is a very competent player, a very good player, but gets a little greedy and doesn't play her idol and goes home because she underestimated Emily. And then we have Emily, who is a great success story for the season, but if we don't recall, that first day or two, Emily was a disaster. She was rubbing people the wrong way. She was speaking out against other tribes at the mat. I mean, it reminds me a lot of what Jelinski did in the first episode of 46, where the other tribes almost saw him as a laughingstock because of the stuff he was saying, the several 7 thing. And I could see this Yanu tribe having a very similar trajectory if they keep losing to Lulu. But yeah, Lulu's just a disaster. Caleb is the only one who kind of gets off scot-free, but even then, when Caleb goes to the other tribes are immediately sketched out by him and see him as this really good salesman to where he's an immediate target at the merge. So I think Lulu is one of the biggest disasters on the tribe, and the only reason they're not number 1 is strictly because the first tribe is the only tribe in Survivor history to get completely decimated. So the only reason Lulu stays alive is because Emily and Caleb do at least make the merge. Whereas here at number 1, we do have Ulong from Palau, which should have been a no no-brainer. And this is kind of a similar thing to Fang with Gabon, where they technically did put the tribes together. Based on the first episode, there was a schoolyard pick. So that is the one redeeming quality I'll give them, is that they did pick their tribes. Survivor didn't pick it for them. So you could say that by nature of that alone, it kind of imbalances the tribes, which is not their fault. That's kind of just how it played out. But at the same time, even though they did the schoolyard pick, I mean, they are a disaster. They lose time after time after time, to where before the merge even happens, it gets down to one person, which is Stephanie, to where there's no merge at all. Stephanie just gets absorbed into Koror because she's the last person left. And the thing with Palau is that, Ulong doesn't necessarily have bad camaraderie. I don't necessarily think they're the most toxic tribe when you look at a comparison to like Fang from Gabon, or Foa Foa from Samoa, or even Manono from One World, or even Saboga in All Stars has worse tribe camaraderie than Ulong. But the fact of the matter is, Ulong makes it down to one person. Stephanie's the last person remaining. And if your tribe gets decimated to one person, there's no way that you could say that any other tribe in Survivor history is worse. Now, if they were to play again and with a different set of challenges, who knows, if Ulong would lose all those times again. But the fact of the matter is, they did. And I think we just have to look at the history. I think Stephanie's still a good player. I think Bobby John's still a good player. I think there are some good players on that tribe. The fact of the matter is, though, on that season, they just played the worst possible game they could play, despite them picking the schoolyard pick themselves, which is something that can't be said about Lulu or Luzon. I do still think it is the most disastrous tribe in Survivor history. So there we go. There's the top 10 list for you. If you disagree with any of my picks, let me know down below. If you want to add any picks to the list, maybe some that I forgot to mention, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, stay tuned. We should be having another recap of episode 2 coming later today on the channel before the episode tonight, so stay tuned for that. Otherwise, enjoy the episode of Survivor tonight, and stay tuned because next week I will have another Recipe for Reality Small Bites episode correlating to whatever episode 3 of Survivor 46 brings us, whatever inspires me. So thank you so much for watching, and who is your favorite disastrous tribe? Let me know down below, and thanks. We'll see you next time.